Cordell, you want to? Okay. Session is being recorded, just so everybody knows. Welcome back to the undergraduate research brown bag series. I'm going to ask everybody to mute their mics so there's no feedback until we get to the question and answer session, and then you can either raise your hand or open your mic, whichever you want. You can also type over in the chat section if you have questions, if you don't want to forget, and we'll make sure to get those asked when we're finished too. I'm delighted actually to have Sandra Jones here today. We have worked together for years. I've always been impressed with her work and how she interacts with the students, um, her passion for inclusion, diversity, and she is the director of our Inclusion and Diversity for Students and has done a marvelous job with all of her activities and all of her events. So I was thrilled when she was willing to do this. And she's going to talk to us today about issues of diversity and inclusion uh, in research from her perspective. So, Sandra, let's take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for each of you who are here and just gave us your time today. Again, as Lavana has said, I am a person who is passionate about what I do, and I look for ways to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in any area. And so when we're talking about research particularly, I have my MSW, that's my master's degree, Master of Social Work, where I had to do a lot of research. I'm currently in the higher ed doctoral program here, so research is kind of what the space that I'm in right now. And so diversity and inclusion in research are definitely things that need to be considered, not just from the researcher's perspective in regards to the conversations that are being had, the areas that are being looked to, what's being researched, making sure that you're not just looking at people who are participating in those spaces, but especially when you're doing any type of clinical research, and the demographic that you're looking at. Because first of all, the researcher on a certain question is going to bring, when you have diversity there, they're going to bring different perspectives to that question, right? The thing that you're trying to research. And when you're looking at demographics, anytime you're not looking at a wide variety of that space and of that area, you're not getting the full spectrum of what's being of the data that's being reported, unless you're specifically looking at a particular group. And so we know that there are different areas that there is not a lot of diversity. And when I say diversity, please hear that I'm not just speaking about race or ethnicity. I'm speaking about gender. I'm speaking about age. I'm talking about sexuality. I'm speaking to ageism, ability, all those types of things that we consider protected classes. But overall, really looking at the varying of perspectives in all of these areas. And so diversity is necessary. Inclusion, again, I say diversity is the easy part. Diversity comes organically in some spaces, not all, but inclusion is something that has to be very intentional. And so inclusion for me says that there's a preparation for you. So when you're looking at sciences in areas that are not necessarily always gender friendly, or friendly to certain ethnic race or racial groups, we have to be mindful in these spaces that are we preparing or making opportunities. And that's where equity comes in, giving people an opportunity and giving them what they need in order to advance in these spaces. Are we preparing in those ways for other groups to be there, especially areas that are largely white male dominated? So being the in the space that I'm in DEI, I'm always looking for opportunities to share and how do we expand in those areas and things that we can do in order to bring DEI to them. So if there's anything particular anyone may have a question about, I would love to open up the conversation. I'm better at answering questions just than just kind of coming off um, the cuff with things. I'm more dialogue oriented. So if there's anyone that has a question, in regards to research, particularly, and diversity. I would love to open the floor for conversation in this space.
Well, I'll jump in and say I really like the distinction you make between diversity and inclusion, but specifically with inclusion being intentional. I think a lot of times people don't realize what it takes to try and create uh, intentionally this inclusive research. And I
Mhm.
was wondering if you could speak about some of the ways you use or think about inclusion when you're doing your research.
Yeah. So some of the things that I do personally, even now, is I make sure that I am surrounded by people that are not like me intentionally. And I mean in every sense of the word that you can think of. Of course, when I'm looking at the research that I'm doing right now, it's I'm very comfortable, of course, dealing with race, and that's a comfortable space for me, even if it's not my race, my racial makeup. I am more uncomfortable dealing with issues of ageism, right? Maybe because I feel as though I'm still in a space that I can navigate some things differently. But when I when I speak to people who may be older than I am, um, and here it is, the contradiction comes in. My culture actually, my racial culture actually has an honor for our elders that's very different from our American culture at large, right? So when I look at the elderly, there is such a reverence and we almost hold them in a space of sovereignty, if you will. And so when you look at the overall culture, though, we kind of elderly are kind of we just kind of dispose of them, and it's just like we're not worried about them. So that's a contradiction for me when I see that at large. So being in a space where I can say, well, this is how this group deals with it. Give me another perspective and try to hear that from an objective point of view is something that I've had to really work on. And so I really lean on my active listening from my social work training to just hear it from perspectives that may not be my own. Another area that is difficult for me is honestly rural cultures because I'm originally from New York, and so inclusion and diversity is just something I was born with. It just all of it was kind of a bit organic. And so to be in a space where no, this is very much this space, and you have to learn. So I had to learn what it meant to be Southern and how that was almost an ethnicity onto itself, right? So I have a distinction of I live in the South. I'm not Southern. I understand the Southern culture, but I live in the South, so I pretty much kind of accommodate the Southern the Southern culture, but it's not embedded within me. I know how to navigate through it. So those are the things that I am very aware of. The cultures, the subcultures. I look to be uncomfortable because I think that that's important when you're dealing with intentional inclusion. You have to embrace the discomfort of it. Because there's going to be things that you don't know. There's going to be mishaps. There's going to be missteps. Embrace that and move into it, lean into it, and learn what you can. And be willing not to be as objective as you can be. So it may come against the things that you already think you know, but be willing to kind of submit yourself to the knowledge of an area that you just don't have any understanding or knowledge in, and say, okay, I'm going to learn here, and be willing to do that.
I think it's wonderful, and I'm going to jump in and follow up because I have control of the room, so I can, right? Um,
Right.
but I really wanted to ask you, and it focuses on what you just said about being uncomfortable. A lot of people, particularly a lot of students, will hang out with people who are like them, who will go to sources that are like them, and they find it very difficult to have an open discussion with somebody who's like 180 degrees different than they are.
Right.
And so they don't include them in their research. They
Hmm.
purposefully leave them out. Like I had one person years ago here who wanted to leave out white men out of our diversity and inclusion discussions.
Hmm.
And I said, we can't do that, and it's not the way diversity and inclusion is supposed to be done.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not the way it works.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you, how, for the researchers out there, the students that are going to listen to this, maybe some faculty, um, how do you incorporate or deal with the ideas or the theories that are directly opposed to yours?
Yeah. See, now you're moving into my dissertation topic.
Oh, good.
I'm actually dealing in my dissertation with the Eurocentric education, right? That we deal with, and the importance of understanding the contributions of other groups. And so, a lot of times, when you have marginalized groups who may know some other perspectives, but may not really have a grasp on it because our education is so Eurocentric, right? So we're not taught about other scholars and academics who have contributed largely to a certain area. We have to search that out, but not being afraid to. And sometimes it's very dismissed in higher ed. But then there's times that you have to push beyond those that are just kind of handed to you on a platter and say, well, let's really look at where did this area actually, what's the origin of it, right? Where did we get this base knowledge from, and who else has contributed? And I think some of that, Dr. Laverne, goes outside of just really race and gender. Sometimes it's nationalism, right? It's just this idea that we're Americans and we do it the best. And saying, well, wait a minute, let's see what does the French have to say about it? What do the Germans have to say about it? What about, and just looking and being willing to look outside of the comfort zone of this is just American ingenuity. And so sometimes that's where I think that's where the best part of dissertations come in, when you kind of something rubs you wrong and you have to say, wait a minute, how am I really engaging this information, right? How am I really, what is it doing in me? And what can I really grab from it? And if it's something that may be something you've never heard before, hey, follow that trail. It's okay to chase that rabbit a little bit and see if you can come up with something that may give another type of not really edginess, but give another kind of paradigm, if you will, to the depth of your research, because you're bringing up another researcher, another academic that really kind of have some depth in your topic, and I think that's very important, just to show that, hey, there's other people who have said things, and they may have said it before this big person that we know, right? Or this more well-known person who may have added the right semantics in the language and did maybe even more depth of research because they may have had the resources. But that idea did not necessarily originate with them. So I think it's about challenging ourselves, and trust, by the time you get, and I'm not discounting research in your master's program, because I promise you I had PTSD from mine, and I'm being triggered in this doctoral program. But by the time you get there, you're just like, okay, let's just get it done. But I challenge you to really kind of go beyond and above, and find out, go deeper into, well, where did this real idea, where did it come from? And who else has something to say about it, other than our well-known scholars and people that are kind of just handed out to us, and see where it leads. I think that's the whole point of having this higher education experience. I missed that. Let me get to the, okay. Okay, Laura. So, what are some ways to address that discomfort when you're working on research alone? In other words, how do you hold yourself accountable for acknowledging the discomfort rather than ignoring it or pushing away? Or how can we teach, encourage others to hold themselves accountable? That's great. That's a really good question. One of the things that I tell people, Laura, is that we're designed to acknowledge discomfort, right? That's how we know when we're sick. That's how we know when something just doesn't feel right in our gut, our intuition, if you will, our discernment. So we're designed to acknowledge it, and it brings up something in us that we have to stop and say, wait a minute, why do I feel this way? So I say lean into your design. And to be in a space, if I'm feeling some kind of way about this, I need to stop and ask myself, why am I feeling this way? Again, research is not just for the data that you're collecting to output it. It's also input, right? It's this idea that how is this making me feel, and how am I really engaging this? And you'll learn more about yourself in research than I think we give ourselves credit for. And it's not supposed to, I think we don't think it's supposed to be this whole introspective experience, but it really is, because you learn about your own biases sometimes and the things that are more subjective than objective in how you're engaging that research. So I would say just experience it. Sometimes you just have to stop and say, wow, okay, this is huge, or ouch, and try to figure out why you feel the way you feel, and it will reveal some things in you that may actually cause you to go back to your research and see if you're being a little biased in some areas. So a good researcher will always investigate these areas and be aware of your biases before you begin, so that your research is not biased as much as possible. Did I answer that?
Laura, is that
Is that
absolutely she says.
she's okay?
There's a certain amount of humility, I think, that goes into research, or maybe that's what we learn in graduate school is the
Yeah,
humility of thinking you're right about something and then being shown that you're very wrong.
absolutely,
Does anybody else
absolutely.
have questions?
I can kind of ask a question.
Okay.
Sure,
A little bit of a kind of more personal to like my own field. Um,
sure.
I'm a history student,
Okay.
and so I was curious if you have any thoughts on how can I bring some like more diverse and more like kind of introduce like diversity and inclusion into my research when I'm looking at history, um, and like I don't really have a good like example of like a time period or anything that I can give
Mm-hmm.
you to kind of work
Sure.
with. But, like, just do you have any ideas of how in the field of history we can be more diverse or inclusive of our in our studies?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I love history, first of all, let me say. And if I wasn't, my undergraduate work was in sociology, anthropology, and religious studies and philosophy, which again were my back doors to history. I took the back doorway to it. So I studied people and how they process, if you will. But I would say that always being mindful that history is written by the victors, right? So it becomes this idea of this is their story about someone else's experience. So I think that is always being mindful of that causes you to not just take it as this is definitive, but being able to ask questions like, well, if this happened, then well, what about this? What about this perspective? And then kind of challenging yourself to look at the those who did not win, right? What are they saying about this? I think one of the best examples for me is October's coming up. We're getting ready to celebrate Columbus Day, right? So we get this idea of Columbus Day, and think about how that was presented to us as children in primary school. And so no one ever just stopped in primary school and go, hey, how do you discover something when people are already there? Right? You just go, hey, Christopher Columbus did this great thing. But as you grow, you start to say, what, there's another side to this story. And just kind of challenging yourself to learn from the other side in all of these victorious tales, right? And saying, okay, if this is the case, what is the other side? Because there's always the other side, but those stories either get destroyed, they're not written, or they're hidden. And it takes more to find them. Um, and so go ahead and find them. Challenge yourself, even if you end up teaching history, challenge your students to find them. This is what we have. It is history, but it's somebody's story. There's a story that's lost here. Challenge them to find that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, I think that would be a really fun assignment. Excuse me.
I think so.
Um, I never thought about doing that, but I might try that in a couple of my philosophy classes to challenge the students to find the other philosophy. Because, like history, philosophy is dominated by European male ideology. And so a lot of people say, well, that's because women and people of color weren't doing philosophy. No, it's that they weren't included in the canon.
They weren't
And so, you
exactly.
know, what do we do then to recoup that? And it's been a struggle for me in my classes because I know if they leave here, they have to know certain philosophers because in grad school that's going to be expected.
Right.
At the same time, I want them to have uh, female philosophers, philosophers of color, philosophers from all over the world. And so it is difficult to make the choices on inclusion, that intentional inclusion in your classes. But I do find that they like it. They like to see the juxtaposition of different ideas.
Right.
It sort of opens them up.
And I like the way you said that, that it's not included in the canon, right? So even whether that is an academic canon, a social canon, a religious canon, it's not included in the canon. That doesn't mean that there are other options outside of that, but we are so encouraged to follow the script. And in following the script, we miss inclusivity. It's just not there. And so sometimes it's a real challenge to find. Sometimes it's an expensive challenge to find because the resources aren't there. So you've got to go above and beyond. But it's always worth it, because once I have the two sides, I'm always trying to figure out, wow, you know, how do you really meld this together? Because sometimes they can be drastically different. And other times it kind of weaves a tapestry and you can kind of see how they fit together. But it's a life learning experience. I think it's not something that we're just um, you're going to get overnight. But then also understand that when you do make those challenges and you do gain this knowledge or the different and varying knowledge, you'll be seen as a heretic, right? You don't, that's wrong. You're absolutely wrong. It's like, no, it's not that I'm wrong. I just have a different perspective, or I've expanded, right, my knowledge base until it's not just this, it's this and that.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it is a little difficult for people to be willing, especially in academia where your advancement in your tenure and promotion all depend on the viewpoints of others.
Mhm.
And so it becomes very difficult to decide for a lot of people whether to toe the canonized line or to go with the non-canonical. And it's not always appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it challenges the status quo. So like I'm a firm believer just in DEI work, from like what we're doing on this campus, that if white males are not at the table, then we're not having a diversity conversation. We're preaching to the choir, if you will. So we're not going to just sit around and talk about our oppression. But if white males and white women are not at the table, and I specify white males because white women will come to these conversations, right? Because they can at least relate to marginalization from gender, so they show up, and they share. White males very rarely, unless you're a professor who gives extra credit for them to come to a brave space, they're just not gonna come and attend. But in those conversations, it's like, so what do we do? So I find myself just being invited or going to or asking to be invited to an area that I know or a organization that I know are predominantly white males, and we try to have the conversation amongst that group, and try it. Now that's not necessarily the most comfortable place to be, but let's try to have the conversation, say what you need to say, so I can help you feel more comfortable to come to the other conversation, right? So it takes more. It takes more to be that intentional. It takes a lot more time and effort, but it's definitely necessary. And then you'll find yourselves in a space where you go, wow, you look up one day and all that intentionality pays off.
Other questions? I don't want to dominate the conversation because she and I talk. We could talk for a long time.
We do this, right?
Well, I do want to jump back, and if somebody has another question, follow up on it, or write it in the chat, or open your mic. When you talked about going out and finding, intentionally finding
Mhm.
inclusive material, I know that I have, as you well know, my office. Um, I have invested in so many books. It's not even funny. I have half the collection here, half the collection at home. And when I moved from Missouri, I gave up my furniture just to move my books and my resources because you can't find them on global indigenous issues. And when you do, you don't want to part with them. So students don't have this luxury of going online and buying books. And I know we have interlibrary loan, which I wish students would use more. But do you have any particular places you recommend for them to look for other material?
Honestly, I am very much in that space, and I am in love with interlibrary loan. So if you can do that, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And like I said, I think that you're right. Students don't necessarily have the resources. So when you chase something down, right? I've been on like eBay auctions, just trying to grab something. That's not always the most economical, right? Thing to do. And like you said, when you find something that's just great, but use the resources you have on this campus. And I will say that, and I will shout that from the rooftops, because this is the time where it's you've already paid for it. So
Yeah.
use this space, and then as you grow and as you get stuff from Interloan, hey, make copies of it. Do what you can do. If they send it to you in a PDF, that's even better. But just be in a space where you are collecting resources as you go. There, I can actually, we're building a resource on our website where we can do links to certain books and things of that nature. So we're in the process. Hopefully, we'll have that done. By spring, so that there will be kind of a resource page for books and things
Oh,
that you can find for inclusivity. So, but by all means, really use the library resources, because they really are great. But like I said, Google's always your friend, and you just never know what you can run up on. But other than that, no, I don't have anything that's special outside. But we are going to post different bookstores, different links from people who specialize in diversity and inclusion services. And again, you may think that there's something that may not be there for your research, but you will find stuff. So don't be afraid to look at something that may not seem to be what you're looking for. You'll never know what you can run up on.
yeah, I like that. I look forward to your site.
Yeah.
Finding all the new stuff. I found some yesterday. I was talking to someone, and I'm back that ageism thing. I'm old, and so back when I had my kids, we didn't have release time, so I went back like 4 days after I had each one of them, and the younger faculty woman I was talking to has a small child, and she was talking about all these new resources for women in academics, and I thought, wow, that's brilliant. I'm glad somebody finally came along with that. But here I've been dealing for almost 40 years in diversity and inclusion issues, and that was one that I missed. That it just because I'm out of that now, I'm a grandma now, so that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
It's when I needed to revisit, and she gave me some books, and I'm going to revisit those books because there's always places you have to learn from,
Hmm.
and it's not. But so I love the fact, and I'll see if I can get you the name of these books and see if we can add those to your list. Just because
Sure.
I forgot to even think about that. It's like here's something.
Hmm.
Um,
And I think that list will continue to grow, right?
yeah,
And because for so long, diversity just meant race. And I think that's where people kind of, even on our campus, trying to change the narrative of what it actually means.
yeah,
And so but it's always something that people are uncomfortable with, it seems. Whether that's race, gender, sexuality, ageism, disability, it's always something that people go, ah, that's a touchy subject. I'm like, well, it's touchy because we won't talk about it. If we change the narrative and just get into these conversations, this is an institution of higher education. I don't know the best place that you can be to have tough conversations, and not be in a space where that you feel like you have to be judged. You're learning here. As long as you enter the conversation with humility and knowing that we're coming to learn and not just, I'm right and you're going to listen to me, we should be able to have tough conversations and leave with some thought. I never go into a conversation trying to change anyone's mind. I just want to present the facts. And after that, let's have a discussion about it. And I will learn from you. I tell people all the time, I learn things all the time. Doesn't mean it changes my mind or my position, but I learned something. So, that was a great conversation. Um, but that's the space that I try to do all things DEI in. And hopefully that even in your research, as you're getting ready to take on these great questions, the question becomes really, what does someone else that's not like me add to this conversation? And does it impact someone else that's not like me? And should this perspective be included? And the answer is always yes. That perspective should be included. And if so, then how does that add to the data? How does that add to that? I am more of a qualitative researcher. So I'm loving, I'm the person that's going to be there for a couple of years doing interviews and conversations and looking at that. So I love capturing the stories of people. And so, yes, I don't care what I'm talking about. We're going to deal with the different perspectives on it, and we're going to figure out why does that perspective the way it is. So that's my love, that's my passion, and I just really do encourage you to continue to challenge yourself to broaden your horizons as you engage different groups and make sure that you're looking at it from a possible, hey, this could be really strong information that I should include or that needs to be brought to the surface.
Well, I love what you're doing, and I love the fact that you're focusing on qualitative data because I think qualitative data is necessary to explain the quantitative data. Um,
Yeah,
we need to know what the stories are, the narratives are in regards to the numbers.
yeah,
So that mixed methodology, I think, is really
yeah,
important.
yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, well, Sandra, do you have any last things you want to tell us or pieces of advice for researching students?
I mean, again, overall, research can be tough, and I'll be the first to admit it, right? Being able to decipher what's important, what's not. I know I've said a lot to go ahead and chase that rabbit. Don't be afraid to chase that rabbit down the rabbit hole, but sometimes that can be dangerous, right? It it'll change your whole research if you're not careful. But listen, I would say push the envelope. Don't be afraid to do that. This is the place in our time here at university to really challenge ourselves, to reach outside of our comfort zones, embrace those things that are not comfortable. If you need advice, sometimes it doesn't necessarily come just from the person who is your direct professor in that field. You may have to come visit the DEI office, right? Or you may need to go visit someone in another space and get a different perspective in order to get a different view of what you're trying to accomplish. So, in all things diversity and inclusion and equity, I would say seize it, go after it. The research is so important, and there's such a wealth of knowledge in this world. It's always disappointing when there's only a limited perspective on it. So I would say that there is a wealth of knowledge out there that is not simply Eurocentric. And don't be afraid to go out there and find it. Challenge yourselves to see things from various perspectives, put different set of eyes on it, talk to people who are not like you, and figure out. You never know. You may be on because you engage different people. You may find something that no one has ever thought about. It may be your launch into your own legacy of academic success.
I like that. Yeah, you never know.
You never know.
Certainly, I never expected my career to end up here, from where I started in just intense philosophy. I mean, and now I do diversity and culture and philosophy and religious studies, and so yeah, you never know what you're going to turn on to. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm
And
going
again, full disclosure, I thought I would end up teaching religious studies. So
to,
for me to, that was the goal. That was the
yeah,
goal. But again, I love my job. I love what I do. Started off in community development, and now just doing this day in and day out. I love what I do. It can be a bit taxing at times, but overall, to watch us, and we have made strides. We still have more to make, but to see what we've done in the last 4 years since I've been here, I can't complain.
yeah. Well, you've done a fantastic job, and I thank you for all the service to the university, to our students, your dedication to diversity and inclusion. And I look forward to talking to you again. So thank you for being here and for sharing. And thanks to all of the people who are here today or will listen to it in our website. And hopefully we'll see you all soon.
All
So
right.
with that,
Thank you, guys.
the
Thank you all for
recording.
coming.
Bye. It's good to see you.
Bye bye.